Chosen chapters from the Velvet Paw of Asquith novels, also known as the Duven books, by Thomas Caulfield. Read by the author. Chapter 4 from The Purging of Ruen, Chapter 11, in which Archibald Hetherington-Mercilus, an elderly and overtly fluffy cat, is enlightened by the Pyjami and Sedervitz as to some vague details regarding the Purging of Ruen, a dastardly plan involving, amongst other things, bags.
"Oh, these seats!" Archibald growled. "Why must they be so plush? Every time we go around a corner I change sides."
"Then use your walking stick as a wedge," the Pyjami growled, pushing him away when he slid into her.
"I wouldn't need to if you weren't so obsessed with polishing everything."
Evening fell across the harbour. Clouds turned pink and sky darkened. Beneath it, their black saloon crunched along a wharf and pulled up beside a berthed launch. Dressed in a blue suit and a chauffeur's cap, Sedervitz Tarpanu alighted the car and opened the door for his passengers. The Pyjami got out, but Archibald struggled to follow.
"No, this is quite ridiculous," Archibald growled. "This car is too low and its seats are too high."
When his complaints degraded into profanity, the Pyjami ordered Sedervitz to lend a paw. Amused, he did so, with Archibald smacking it away, before trying again. "Perhaps you might consider a second walking stick, Archie," Sedervitz said, when the animal eventually conceded. "If you find one inadequate." Archibald snatched his paws free.
"If I had a second one, cat, I'd beat you with it."
Sedervitz laughed. When all three had boarded the launch in a sort of reverse fiasco, Sedervitz replaced his chauffeur's cap with a captain's cap and started its engine. With a roar, he churned them from the wharf, spray sweeping their wake as the boat swung around. Archibald was sent careering to its stern, where his veritable swathe of obscenities was drowned beneath throbbing engine. Being one of Ruen's wealthiest residents, the Pyjami owned an enormous yacht, which was often moored off the northern headland. The spicy Cabinari was spectacular in appearance, displacement and luxury. It boasted 3 galleys, 30,000 bedrooms and a carport. It had 4 small dining halls, each with its own polished table, a shopping centre's worth of escalators, 1 shopping centre and a bath. On it, the Pyjami held spectacular balls, with her guests being the elite of the elite, so elite that it ought to be spelt with a capital. The galas were not given to entertain, however, but to remind them all who was in charge. When they rounded the headland, the spicy Cabinari appeared. Lit in a trellis of lights, its white slate shimmered across water like an early rising moon. Thumping through waves, Sedervitz approached its stern before slowing with a flare of engine until gently bumping alongside. A rope was thrown from the yacht's high deck, which he caught and tied to their launch. While their boat pitched and rolled, the Pyjami and Archibald stumbled like invalids. When it teetered in their favour, they clambered aboard a platform at the yacht's stern. When Sedervitz followed, with none of their clumsiness, the platform ascended to the height of deck. Archibald shivered, his fur wet from sea.
"I'd rather be back in the car," he grumbled. "At least it was warm. Why does there have to be so much water everywhere? All this splashing makes me want to go to the toilet."
"Perhaps you ought to have gone before we left the set," Sedervitz said, amused.
"I did, confound it."
"And yet you suffer still?"
"Unfortunately, my bladder is not what it once was."
"Is that because it used to be your brain?" When Archibald exploded with rage, the Pyjami said, "Sedervitz, that is quite enough. Hold your tongue, or I shall hold it for you." With a smirk, Sedervitz gazed across water, coloured purple by evening. When the cats stepped from the hoist, waiting animals saluted and stood to attention. Sedervitz strode past them, demanding the chef be sent for immediately. While they hurried away to oblige, he marched across the deck, leaving the Pyjami to help Archibald hobble after him.
"What is he doing here anyway?"
Archibald hissed, fuming at the cat's magnificent strides.
Sedervitz is a fine animal, the Pyjami said, and a considerable asset to what we have been discussing.
Rubbish. He's nothing of the sort. The cat is insolent and arrogant. He's probably one of those pesky little runts himself. To trust an animal of that age with what you have prepared is ludicrous.
On the contrary, my dear Archie, Sedervitz Tapanu is more devoted than you realize. I have absolute faith in him.
He snatched his paws free.
Why?
He growled.
Tell me, and I warn you that my support might be less than forthcoming should you refuse.
I have reasons you do not need to know, she snapped. I trust him implicitly. Indeed, I trust him more than I do you.
He muttered something incredulous, knowing her brilliance well enough. With a humph, he accepted her paw again, and they hobbled to a doorway. Through it, a luxurious room waited. Cream leather seating lined its perimeter, with a plushness suggesting any who sat on it might not re-emerge for days. Portholes lined a wall, painted a burnt orange, and although the ceiling was low, it glowed from hidden lighting. At the room's centre was a polished table, upon which was a small granite box brimming with crispy scales. The Pyjami led Archibald to the seating, where he prodded its upholstery warily.
He complains a great deal,
Sedervitz said when she returned to him.
He is old.
You are old, and you don't whine like he does.
Not out loud, perhaps, said the Pyjami. Do not forget, Sedervitz, that we need his cooperation. We will not manage without another counsellor on board. I expect the very best behaviour from you. No more riling. Is that understood?
Sedervitz took a large crispy scale, which he munched indignantly, while the Pyjami went to help Archibald to a more traditional chair when he refused to drown in upholstery. The chef arrived, and Sedervitz ordered a remarkable quantity of food and a bottle of sparkling water. After the chef left and Archibald was comfortable, the Pyjami indicated it was time. Sedervitz pressed a button beside a picture on the wall.
My dear Archie, the Pyjami said, there comes a time when leaders must make decisions based not on common agreement, but rather the common good.
A panel slid aside to reveal a safe, which Sedervitz fiddled with. After a click, he opened its door and removed a large roll of paper and 4 shiny stones. He closed the safe and returned to the table. The Pyjami continued,
sometimes the opinions of many encumber foresight. At such times, it is imperative to remain focused and see beyond opinion to ensure the right course of action is not veered from.
Too many chefs, perhaps.
Indeed. And for the good of Ruen, I have taken such a liberty. For I have conceived a plan to purge Ruen of those pesky little runts by a means so brilliant that some nights I remain unable to sleep. So secret are these plans, Archie, that currently Sedervitz is the only other animal aware of them.
When Archibald glowered at Sedervitz, he returned it with a smile.
There is no doubt, she continued, that during the latter aspects of the purging's implementation, some councillors will question the activities necessary in bringing it to fruition. As a result, the success of said scheme pivots upon having another councillor to help quell their concerns.
Having witnessed Ruen's regress beneath the young animals marauding it, Archibald folded his paws and waited. That a plan existed to end such blasphemy was encouraging. His glare on Sedervitz remained.
And what, pray, does this scheme entail?
With a nod from the Pyjami, Sedervitz unrolled the paper across the table and weighed down its corners with stones. Struggling to his paws, Archibald peered at the schematics drawn upon it. When realization dawned, his curiosity exploded into astonishment, and he bent closer to be certain. After some mutterings of calculation, he looked up at them.
But this is over 5,000 paws long!
The Pyjami raised her whiskers, and Sedervitz's twitched proudly. He returned his gaze to the paper, passing a furry paw from one end to the other as though something more sensible was scribed beneath.
can't be serious!
Silence.
I mean, what will it use?
Ah! Whispered the Pyjami, a smile cleaving her face in two.
That is where the true genius comes in.
Archibald waited for an answer, but it wasn't forthcoming.
Very much a need-to-know basis only, old chap,
Sedervitz said.
though this isn't the half of it, I can assure you.
Confusion left Archibald oblivious to the cat's conceit.
What do you mean?
He asked. Sedervitz looked at the Pyjami, who nodded permission. Indicating the schematics, he said,
My dear Archie, there are 13 of these masterpieces.
To this, Archibald staggered backwards as astonishment indulged in something of an encore. Teetering upon his stick, he wandered to the perimeter seating and sank into it. The Pyjami ground her teeth, concerned that he hadn't exploded in congratulation. If she'd underestimated him, the cat would not return to shore. After a time, he whispered,
But 13? Where can you have 13 of these things?
Sedervitz was about to speak, but the Pyjami held up a paw.
There are ways and means, my dear Archie, she said. Ways and means.
And what is it specifically that you require of me?
Her concerns dissipated. He wasn't debating involvement so much as battling astonishment.
For 2 reasons, she said. Firstly, because the resources involved in fabricating these things will not go unnoticed, which requires another counsellor to pacify the dissent that will inevitably arise. And secondly, these will result in immeasurable chaos across the city, and it would be impossible to wield authority alone amid such turmoil. I need another beside me, Archie. An animal as committed as I am to preserve Ruen's ways. Indeed, to return its ways.
She narrowed her eyes.
I need a counsellor to second the subsequent policies that will ensure such contamination never occurs again.
He stared at her.
But surely after this, there would be mutiny. We can't seriously imagine there'd been a revolt against the council following the use of these.
The Pyjami smiled.
Were you made aware of further detail, Archie, you would realise no animal could cast aspersion upon the ruling council.
But how so?
Sedervitz smirked.
As the Pyjami has already said, that is where the true genius lies.
Still, he stared.
It does take a certain genius, the Pyjami agreed, to find means of removing those pesky little runts from our city without breaking a single brick of its walls.
Echoing her sentiments, Sedervitz added,
There's a certain beauty in irony, Archibald, which the 3 of us shall bear witness to.
A purging there shall be, the Pyjami purred. In 7 days' time, a purging there shall be.